Hello, I'm Dr. Ross Andersen. Today we are going to be doing some very interesting work. We're going to be looking at live blood microscopy and microscopes. Microscopes are a remarkable tool for medicine and other healing arts in that they give us a look into a world that we can't see with the naked eye. And that's very important. Live blood microscopy has been around for many years now in its current form, and there are numerous disciplines in live blood microscopy. I personally teach one called morphologic hematology. Fancy words for live blood analysis. Live blood analysis in its current form, the way it's taught by myself, is something that was developed by Dr. Philip Hoekstra and a number of his associates in the 1970s. They looked at what the medical people were doing with blood, which is actually, in essence, dead blood because it is smeared on a microscope slide, dried, and stained, and then observed. Unfortunately, a lot of information is lost through that process. Looking at the blood in its live state gives us the same information and much, much more. That is extremely important because, guess what? We are living beings. We aren't dead, smeared on a microscope slide. So, today we're going to actually put together a microscope. I've been doing this for a very long period of time. Started in 1995 and took a fantastic course that was presented in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I was immediately enthused about the process and the art and science of live blood analysis and wanted to incorporate it into my naturopathic practice. So I got a microscope very quickly after that, very similar to this one that we're going to assemble today. And I started practicing and educating myself. The course back then was not what it is today. The course that we teach produces a very, very qualified live blood analyst by the end of the 5-day course. Back then, all we had was a slideshow, and I didn't get to see that many views of the abnormal and normal findings. So for 3 months, what I did was I went in 3 nights a week into my office after seeing my normal patient volume. And I looked at my blood or a friend's blood or someone from my family that wanted to donate a drop of blood for study. And after doing that for 3 months, I then did 10 clients for free so that I could get my procedures down with clients to a fine art. And after that, I incorporated live blood analysis into my new patient workup with virtually everybody, unless they had something crazy simple like a sore throat or a sprained ankle, which was not a big issue to correct. But anyone with any chronic issues, whether it was arthritis or cancer or multiple sclerosis or any of the other nasty things that people are currently suffering from, they all got a live blood analysis, and that was incorporated into my new patient workup. I also had some very big advantages in that I was the clinician and the live blood analyst. So I could look at their lab work, their x-rays, other studies that had been done, and compare those things to their live blood analysis. And consequently, I was able to put together a very, very integrative approach with live blood analysis being a very, very important part of that work. Now, it's interesting, I want to comment about this. The advent of the COVID pandemic has brought live blood analysis into a very different light in the world of science, medicine, other health professions, because so many people are doing high quality live blood analysis that are putting out videos and pictures of what they're seeing in the blood. And it's been a remarkable shift in what we have been seeing in the blood since the onset of this pandemic. And I'll comment about some of these things a little later. They're very, very fascinating. And it's one of the things that we teach in the course is what I call the COVID bits of what's going on in the blood. So let's start by looking at a microscope. Microscopes have been around for hundreds of years. Physicians have been looking at blood under the microscope for a very long period of time. They started doing this over 100 years ago, and then all of a sudden, about 50 years ago, live blood analysis came into being, and it has now evolved into a very, very sophisticated, extremely sophisticated art and science, which we teach. So let's have a look at a microscope. A micro simply means small, and scope means we are looking at something extremely small that cannot be viewed with the naked eye. So we have to look at it through a microscope. So a microscope has a number of different parts, which we will go through as we assemble this unit. The base of the microscope, which is what we see here, and the body of the microscope. And I'm going to turn it a little bit so we have a little better view of it. Actually, we can do that here. So if we look at the microscope, we see it has many different components. It's a very complicated and sophisticated technology that has evolved over the last couple of hundred years. The best microscopes are produced in 3 countries. I personally use German microscopes. The Zeiss company has been around for a very, very long time and were the main pioneers in the development of microscopy. There are other companies in Germany. Leitz is another one. Japan jumped in, of course, with their companies, and there are 3 in Japan that are excellent. And Nikon, of course, and we will be dealing with Nikon cameras here later on. Olympus is another producer of excellent, excellent microscopes. And there's another one not a lot of people have heard of called Meiji. And it is also out of Japan, making top-notch microscopes. So we have 3 Japanese players in the field and 2 German ones. There's also another one, a Russian one, that I have been able to observe, and it's called Lomo, L-O-M-O. And the Lomo company emerged out of technicians that went to or were brought to Russia after the Second World War. During the Second World War and after the Second World War, there was a split in Germany, as most people know, and the Zeiss company divided into 2 different companies, actually. Zeiss Jena, which was the East German company, and then the West German Zeiss company. Those have now reunited, and the Zeiss Jena microscopes are still around, but they're older and they're sort of being phased out. The main Zeiss company is still in business, making probably the best microscopes on the planet. Zeiss is famous for making incredible lenses, binoculars, eyeglasses. The lenses in the Hubble Space Telescope, made by Zeiss. So they've got a pretty good reputation, and their quality is absolutely second to none. So the body of the microscope looks like this, and it has a number of components. Let's go over here. So it has a focus component, of course, as would binoculars or anything that acts as a visual aid. It has lenses, which are here, and we can see the lenses. These are the most important part of a microscope in a way. It's all important, but the quality of the lenses is something that must be talked about here. There are low quality, low resolution lenses, and there are medium quality, and then there are the incredibly high quality lenses, which is what I use. And there are different names for these, but just so you know and you can research it yourself, I use Plan Apo. Plan means flat field, and Apo is a description of the actual optics and the color resolution of the lenses. And to give you an example, this particular lens right here, which is actually a Nikon lens, the others on this scope, there's a Zeiss one here, the others are Olympus, and I mix and match with lenses because they all fit the microscopes, and there are different qualities of lenses, so I mix and match what I can. This particular microscope lens here, which is the 100 power, cost about $5,200 for this one piece of glass. Now, it's not one piece of glass, it's numerous lenses stacked upon each other to allow it to do what it actually does. And I'm going to take it off so people can see sort of how these things fit together. So if we take off this lens and we look at it, it doesn't look like much, really, but that's over $5,000 worth of technology right there. The number of man-hours involved in manufacturing one of these lenses is almost hard to imagine. And whether it was done in Japan or Germany or Russia, it's a lot of man-hours, and a lot of people worked on each lens to get it to the perfection that they have. And that is one of the words that I like, is perfection, because in live blood analysis, you want the best equipment so you can do a perfect job at evaluating people's blood. So the lenses are extremely important. They start at a very low power, and then we move to a higher power, and a higher power again and again, and all the way up to the highest power, which is the 100 times lens, or objective is what the scientific word for these is. They're called objectives. This microscope uses oil. And people say, what do you mean it uses oil? And when I'm putting oil in between the lenses and on the microscope slide, they say, what are you doing? And I say, well, I'm putting oil on because extremely high quality microscopes use oil to transmit the light and the imaging. And the reason they do that is that the oil transmits imaging and light more effectively than air. And so we have oil on what's called the condenser, and we need to talk about the condenser. The condenser is the thing that condenses the light. Why do we want it condensed? Well, we need a lot of light in this technology, and I'll talk about the condenser. This is an ultra dark field condenser, and it's a very special technology. If you look in the bottom, I don't know if you can see that, but there is a silver ball in there, which is actually a round mirror that reflects the light in a very special path up to the specimen, which is the blood on a microscope slide. Now, a dark field microscope, and it's very important that we use that term right now. The reason we use dark field and not bright field, and I also do not use something called phase contrast, and some of the people watching this video might not be happy with that term, but I was taught dark field back in 1995, and I still feel that it is the absolute best technology for evaluating live blood. It's called dark field because the background is dark and the light is not actually coming through from the bottom. It's being reflected at an angle like this. So it's reflecting off all of the surfaces of the specimen, what's in the specimen, as opposed to shining through it, as in phase contrast, which a lot of people use for blood, but I do not believe works as well. So we use dark field analysis, and when you read about this or hear about it or see videos on YouTube, you will hear people talk about dark field live blood analysis, which is the way to go. With this microscope, I can see things that other people cannot, such as obscure funguses, various bacteria, and things that in other methods would be totally invisible. And we want to see those because it's extremely important that people understand that this will show things that other diagnostic or analytical methods cannot. And that's why we use it, simply because it gives us information we can't get any other way. So the microscope body looks like this. The next thing that we're going to look at is the binocular. Okay, this is not a binocular. This is a trinocular. And people say, what do you mean, trinocular? I've heard of binoculars, but never trinoculars. Well, trinoculars means three. A binocular is two eyepieces. And through a binocular, you look out into the distance and you see things much closer. So a trinocular is this, and it does a couple of different things. Number one, it lets us look through here with our eyes to see the image. The second thing it does is it puts part of the light up into a camera so we can photograph the image in video or pictures. And we need to do that so that we can record what we find in somebody's blood. So the trinocular fits on the top of the microscope like this. And we tighten down the hook up. And now we have something that looks like a microscope. So if we look at it here, we can go over here now, we see it's got what a microscope looks like. This is what you would see in a movie. And strangely enough, these microscopes are frequently used as props in movies, whether they're medical or science movies. And that's a good thing. So we have the eyepieces here, which I'm adjusting a little bit. This microscope also has another interesting feature in that it can be 100% of the light here, or it can split the image, which is what we need to do. So when I pull this out, we are splitting the image between here and here. That's a very important part of the concept. The reason being that we want to be able to take pictures of what we see. For our records. And there are numerous people doing this work right now that are posting videos on YouTube of what they're seeing in the blood, which is a little alarming actually these days. I have over 1,000 hours of archived video of live blood exams that I have done since 1995. And recently I've been going back and looking at them because we're seeing things now that we did not see until the advent of the COVID inoculations, which was in 2020. I was one of the first actually to do an analysis on a microscope exactly like this at a student's clinic in Canada, and we got a sample of AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, and we put a drop of it on a microscope slide and looked at it under this microscope. We saw some very interesting things that looked like rocks or crystals of various shapes, and it was a bit alarming because the fluid in the vial looked pretty clear. We couldn't see anything with the naked eye, and that's why we used a microscope to evaluate it. I have since seen those same structures in numerous blood samples that I have evaluated over the last 3 years. So the first structure we saw after the advent of that program was what I called COVID crystals. And we saw them extensively in people who had the inoculation. And then about a year later, in, I would say, mid to late 2021, we started seeing them in people who had not had the inoculation. And this coordinates with what others doing this work and publishing their findings found as well. Same time frames, strangely enough. The second thing we started to see were strange-looking blood clots in the sample. Blood clots in a live blood sample are a normal thing. And the reason I say that is that when you take a blood sample for live blood analysis, if you do it properly and are instructed by me, you will have that sample underneath the second piece of glass within 5 seconds. So the exposure of that blood to air is very short. However, that short exposure activates what are called the platelets. Those are the blood clotting cells that save our lives when we cut our hand in the kitchen, skin our knee, or have any other injury that could lead to significant bleeding. It is normal to see blood clots on a live blood sample. Now, the interesting thing about the clots that we see allow us to evaluate the efficiency of the blood clotting mechanism in the client. And so there are normals and abnormals. And the small blood clots that we have seen for many, many years evaluate this mechanism and allow me to know if the person is what I call a stroke waiting to happen, which means their blood clotting mechanism may be overactive. If that is the case, they are in jeopardy and at risk for cardiovascular disorders, which is not a good thing. And we can evaluate that with live blood. It's one of the many things that we can see in a live blood sample. If somebody has an overactive blood clotting mechanism, we want to mitigate that, of course, and make sure that they don't have a blood clot that can lead to significant disease or death, and that is the case. If we see large blood clots forming very quickly on the sample, then we would call that aggressive platelet activity, and that needs to be dealt with so that they don't have that risk. And by evaluating that, I've been able to predict and know whether or not they have a family history. So if I see that sort of activity on the slide, I will ask them if they have a family history of heart attack or stroke or pulmonary embolism, which occurs from clots that occur in the veins and go eventually to the lungs. So we can tell if that's an issue, and we want to mitigate that so that they don't have to worry about that in their future. And consequently, through live blood analysis, we can actually save lives and extend lives and improve the quality of people's lives quite dramatically. It's one of the reasons that I do it, that over the years, I've been able to see amazing improvements in people's lives through finding out what's going on inside them in their bloodstream and correcting those things. The blood is actually called, in many disciplines, the river of life, because it is the fluid that flows through us that brings the nutrients to all of our cells, carries wastes back to be disposed of, and without blood, which is red, as you well know, and of course, why is it red? Because it contains something called hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin is the chemical that absorbs oxygen in the lungs and carries that oxygen to every cell in the body. And most people know that without oxygen, we don't live very long. We breathe constantly, and we never stop breathing until one day we stop breathing. And unfortunately, we're all headed that direction somewhere, somehow. So the breathing mechanism and oxygen are extremely important, and so is carbon dioxide. People think carbon dioxide is actually a bad thing, but it's actually part of our normal physiology, and it's a necessary thing in our bodies. So if you're not getting enough oxygen to your brain is oxygen deprived, and many things can result from that. We can see all of these things in regards to the blood flow in the live blood sample when it's properly evaluated. And putting these findings together allows for an interesting thing I call information extrapolation. So, having done over 8,000 live blood exams, I've been able to put together a lot of findings that allow me to evaluate risk factors for people in various areas and levels of certain things. And all of that information is given to the client in a very sophisticated and comprehensive report with significant recommendations as to what they can do to not have to face some of the eventualities that they would if we didn't find them now and correct them in their lifestyle. And that's the important thing, is the style in which people live their lives. And our lifestyle determines largely our health. And crazy things in our environment now that are occurring and have been for, well, 3 decades now, electromagnetic radiation. We can see the effects of electromagnetic radiation on the blood. And I can tell by looking at somebody's blood if they, if we see damage to the red blood cells in a certain form, the first thing I ask them is, where is the cordless phone base in your house? And they will say, oh, it's on the bedside table, or, it's in the room next door. And then I ask, where is your Wi-Fi router? And it's usually pretty close by as well. So they're getting significant radiation exposure 24/7 while they're in their house. And then I ask how close their house is to a cell tower. And it's a block away, or it's down the street. And that's another significant exposure to radiation that damages the blood, damages the DNA. It doesn't take long to have DNA damage, and that, as everybody knows, is not a good thing, and it leads to cancer. If that is occurring, we want to stop that. We want to make recommendations that they can do, usually fairly inexpensively, to not have to be exposed to that level of what's called non-ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation is nuclear radiation, and pretty well everybody knows that's not something you want to be close to. Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and a few other nuclear catastrophes that have occurred over the years have led to significant death and damage. And non-ionizing radiation from radio frequency sources like your smartphone and these other things, all the technology that we have these days, are causing the same problems. It just takes a lot longer for the effects to show up. And that's one of the major issues, is that these things accumulate, and the damage accumulates in your body. And the problem is, if the DNA is damaged, it's extremely hard to repair. And if you already have cancer from one of these sources, or an accumulation of these sources, that becomes more difficult to get rid of. Brain cancer caused by a smartphone, or the cordless phone base on the bedside table, and I've seen this many times with people who've had these challenges, as being a causal factor, or the causal factor in these issues. That DNA damage, if it's occurred, is very hard to correct, but it can, in many cases, be corrected. And these are things we'll be delving into in videos in the not too distant future. We'll be delving into a lot of these challenges with the work that we've done and are doing to help people that are suffering from these maladies. And that, unfortunately, is a fairly significant percentage of the population these days, as pretty well everybody, I think now there are over 6 billion of these on the planet. Did you know that? 6 billion. Almost everybody carries one, and they emit significant amounts of radiation. Most people don't know it because you can't see it, smell it, or taste it, but you can feel it. And most people know, if you hold the smartphone up to the side of your head, it's not a good thing to do if it's transmitting a signal. And there are ways to mitigate that. It's an extremely important thing these days to not hold the smartphone at your head. And turn it off at night, please. And turn off your Wi-Fi router. And if at all possible, get rid of your cordless phone. You don't need it. You can get a wired landline. It's not that difficult. And oh yeah, we're going back to the 80s, but guess what? We were healthier back then. So let's get back to the microscope. The microscope needs light, a lot of light. In fact, this microscope was designed for a 100-watt light bulb. And the light bulb goes in this thing here called, and we can go over and have a closer look at it. This is called the light source or light box. Inside of it is a very powerful light bulb, and it hooks up to the back of the microscope, and I'm going to hook it up so you can see how that works. It hooks up like that and attaches very securely to the body of the microscope. The light is then transmitted from the bulb into the microscope. It's reflected by a mirror in the base of the microscope, and it comes up through the specimen and into one of the objectives or lenses. And that's how the microscope works. Once we get the light flowing, we have to adjust the condenser. Remember that thing that condenses the light into the path that we want. And once we have that set up, we now have to use the focusing mechanism, which is on the body of the microscope, to actually move the objective up and down until we get it accurately focused. And our image through the eyepieces, binoculars, and the camera piece are focused so that we have a detailed image. One of the most important words in microscopy is resolution. And what that term means is the detail that we can see with the microscope. We want to have extremely detailed pictures. And those pictures then are transmitted to the eyes and to the camera so that we can evaluate what we're seeing. And that evaluation leads us to the conclusions that we have about the person's health, and we can make recommendations on what they need to do to improve their health. Now, this particular microscope has something mounted on the light box right here, which is not normal. This is a thing that was added on the recommendation of the technician at the Zeiss outlet in Toronto, Ontario, many years ago as an upgrade to the system. And the reason we needed an upgrade was splitting the light between the eyepieces and the camera gave us a lower level of light that was not enough to give us really good imaging. So he suggested we bump up from a 100-watt light bulb to a 150-watt light bulb, which is exactly what we did. The problem was the extra wattage in the 150-watt light bulb was too hot, and the bulbs would blow up and would quit like a light bulb does in a light socket. So we had to add a cooling fan on the top of the light box to cool the 150-watt bulb down so it wouldn't blow. And now I get between 2 and 3 years out of a 150-watt light bulb before it needs to be replaced. And that was a very, very good modification to the system and has worked extremely well ever since. We will be moving up very shortly to an LED light system, which has been developed by a company in the United States for older microscopes and newer microscopes as well, but older microscopes much more specifically. And the LED light source will not have those issues and will give extremely high light power and resolution for a microscope like this. I want to talk now about affordability issues, because people look at a microscope like this and they think it costs an arm, a leg, and a tooth and more than a car, which actually can be true if you're buying a new one. This is an older microscope from the early 1980s, and these are the microscopes that I've used over the years and that I supply to students when I teach. The reason, well, there are a number of reasons actually. Number one is that the reproduction resolution of these microscopes is about as good as you can get. And in the early 1980s, the companies manufacturing microscopes reached what's called the epitome of resolution in light microscopy. So it hasn't really gotten any better than it was back then. So for somebody to get into live blood analysis, it's not a cheap endeavor unless you can get an older microscope like this. And I have sold over 40 of these over the years to students and to people who wanted simply to upgrade from a poor quality microscope to one that was higher quality, and they didn't want to sell their car in order to be able to afford it. So I've been able to find the components for these microscopes from various sources throughout the world and put them together to create extremely high quality microscopes at a decent price. And those prices do vary somewhat depending on the components with the microscope and the manufacturer, but it makes live blood microscopy affordable to most people, whether or not they want to do it professionally or simply for their own interest. I'll talk a little bit about a fairly well-known actor who is also a live blood microscopist. And his name is Nick Nolte. You may have heard of Nick Nolte. You've probably seen him in movies. Mr. Nolte is actually a very, very good live blood analyst and starts his day virtually every day by doing his blood in the morning, first thing. And that's when you do the live blood, you want to be fasting so that there are certain things that don't show up from just having eaten a heavy meal of some sort for breakfast. So he starts his day by analyzing his blood, and then he figures out what his day can be like in regards to diet and exercise and other things that he might be doing in his lifestyle. And I personally think that's a wonderful way to operate your life. My blood is done at least once a month. Many of the components in the blood live for 3 to 4 months, and consequently, when we do a live blood analysis, we are looking to some extent at the last 3 to 4 months of somebody's life and what they were doing with their bodies and with their food intake and vitamins, minerals, detoxification, exercise. All of these things are components of what the blood can and should look like in a healthy person. And I want to talk a little bit about what I just said, healthy person. What is a healthy person? After having done over 8,000 of these on thousands of different people, because I have had clients who used this and still do as a way of monitoring their health. And so I have clients that will have it done every 3 months, every 6 months, once a year. They want to know how their body is functioning and if they should make some changes in their lifestyle to moderate what they're doing in order to be healthier in the long run. Doing it every morning is probably a wise thing, but might be a little more than I think is necessary for my own personal situation. But it can be used to monitor one's health. It can also be used to determine the effects of certain things on the body, whether it's fasting, cleaning your gallbladder, taking a different supplement, drinking more water, getting more exercise. All of these things can have a bearing on what the blood looks like on a regular basis. So I do recommend people get a microscope, learn how to use it, monitor their health. It will improve their life. It will extend their life. And as the saying goes, it will give years to your life and life to your years. Ultimately, the goal of all the work that we do in naturopathic medicine is to not have people get a disease. And that, unfortunately, is what is happening these days. People are getting diseases, and those diseases, in some cases, end their lives or make their lives very miserable or shorten their lives, and that's hardly what we want. So let's move to the topic of the camera.
Okay, rolling.
So let's talk about the camera. You remember we said the camera goes here on the trinocular part of this setup. And the light is split by pulling this in or out. And the light then, when this is out, some of the light will go to the camera and allow the camera to take an image. Now, this is an older Nikon camera that I've used for many, many years, that I still use at times, and it fits on here, just like that. So it has its own eyepiece, and that is the piece, not unlike the pieces here, these lenses for our eyes. It's a separate eyepiece for the eye of the camera. Now, the reason I've used this camera for many years is it has a zoom capability built into it. So I can zoom in on what I'm looking at and have a much closer look. And that is an extremely valuable thing to have in the camera system, is the zoom capability. So when I look for a camera, I want it to have a zoom ability, if at all possible. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's a very good feature to have. So this older Nikon camera that I've been using for many years, very soon is going to be replaced with a very sophisticated DSLR camera. We will be experimenting with this and other cameras with digital technology to find the very best cameras for microscope work that we can possibly use. And the reason we want the best cameras, and this one actually, strangely enough, is a D7200, and it will fit. We've rigged it up with an eyepiece, so it will fit on the top of the camera. And it does have a zoom capability built into it, which is what we need. So it'll be really fun experimenting with different cameras until we find the epitome of resolution. There's that word again, resolution. Okay, not revolution, resolution. And when we get there, we will have pictures that are startling and beyond world class, as a lot of microscopists do these days with very sophisticated and incredibly expensive microscope systems that they have acquired for clinical work. So the camera is important. How it works, how it functions, how it's integrated into the system, also extremely important. So we've covered pretty much all the different aspects.
What about the video out, Ross?
Cameras need something called video out. And some cameras, you can hook up a live monitor to the camera, such as this monitor here. Now, in my live blood lab, in my clinic, I have a 50-inch 4K television monitor that I use for live blood imaging. And it's incredibly striking. It makes the pictures extremely clear, vivid, and also something that clients can identify with. One of the reasons that we use video is because we can describe to the people what they are seeing, what it means, and it makes it much more real if they can see it on a large video screen. And that's one of the keys to really high quality live blood analysis, is the video aspect of the whole process. I started many, many years ago. I'm trying to think now. It's a very long time ago, and it would have actually been in the late 90s. And I spent a huge amount of money on what was then a world-class monitor, laboratory monitor, and the thing was huge before flat screen televisions. It was massive. It cost a very, very large amount of money, but it was worth it because I got imaging that was extremely high quality back then. And I had one room in my clinic specifically devoted to live blood analysis. And I will also talk about something that many people will not be able to understand thoroughly, but for 4 years I operated a research microscope that was actually a $1 million microscope. People say, what do you mean, $1 million microscope? Well, this microscope was originally purchased by the University of Calgary in Canada in 1976. And at that time, it cost $175,000, which translated into today's money is well over $1 million. The Zeiss company, same company that made this one, made 800 of these very, very special, extremely expensive microscopes at that time. It was a project that unfortunately was scrapped because they were simply too expensive and they didn't sell that well because they cost so much money. I got mine used and was able to configure it for live blood analysis, and it was, to my knowledge, the only one on the planet configured for live blood analysis. And we talked about light bulbs a few minutes ago with 150 watts in here for this microscope. That microscope had 250 watts of quartz halogen light that was produced to give it the imaging that was necessary. And it had such incredible detail that I could see the chromosomes inside of a cell, which is a remarkable feat for a live blood microscope. And unfortunately, I was not able to keep it. And since 2002, I've been using these microscopes, and I have owned over 40 of them over the years that have gone to students and other people who wanted a very high quality microscope without selling their car to get it. So once again, Zeiss is, and there's an expression, Zeiss price, because they are extremely expensive microscopes and worth every penny that are spent on the high resolution that they are capable of. However, Nikon is another company that makes microscopes that are equally as high quality with equal resolution, and we are currently actually filming this piece, this educational piece, on a Nikon camera. And Nikon is well known for their quality, their durability, and the incredible technology that they have developed beyond what other companies have. So Nikon, Zeiss, the other companies, all excellent. And if you have a good technician who can help keep your microscope functioning properly, if it's necessary, that is something that you want to make sure is available. So if you're getting a live blood microscope, every major city in the world will have microscope technicians that have the capability to maintain and perhaps upgrade a microscope system, and that is something you want to ascertain prior to purchasing a high-end microscope. I will make a couple of comments about quality. There are microscopes available on the internet through various sources that do not have what is necessary to do high-quality live blood work. And they will tell you that they're extremely high quality at a really good price, but you have to be very, very careful what you buy. I have seen microscopes that could not do dark field live blood analysis that were sold to students fraudulently. And this was a very, very sad situation that occurred with two of my students that had purchased these microscopes from a fraudulent, uneducated instructor in Canada. And unfortunately, they spent $7,000 on these microscopes and they didn't work. Very sad situation. Both of them purchased microscopes from me at the same price and were thrilled with what they got, and now are doing high quality live blood analysis. You have to do your research. You must do your research before you purchase. You must know the scope is high quality, is at a level that is going to give you the reproduction you need and last for a lifetime. This microscope right here that we've been looking at was built in the early 1980s and still functions as good or better than the day it was originally purchased. And that's what you want. If you buy a high quality car, you want it to last a very long time, and you probably don't want to drive it in salt. So it's the same thing. You want to take care of your microscope. It's going to be your friend. It's going to be your clinical tool. You need to learn how to maintain it, how to look after it, how not to abuse it. And all of these things are taught in the microscope course that we will be teaching. And that date has now been set as the first 5 days of March. We will be accepting only a very small number of students. And the reason for that is that it's very, what we call hands-on. There are live blood courses that are taught online, but there are parts of those courses that are not adequate, in my opinion. The course that we will be teaching will be recorded, and the parts of it that are extremely important are the parts that will be taught in the course hands-on and can be taught online with proper instruction. And there are very few instructors that can actually do that. And I will talk about something very, very important right now, and that is the sample. And the sample is the drop of blood on the microscope slide. So let's go over that. Creating an image of blood with the microscope. There are some things that we need to do that. Let's talk about what we need. Now, this is a slide box, and it contains, right now, microscope slides, and that's what they look like. We can hold it up really close. They are clear glass of a very specific size. And when you buy microscope slides, they come in a box like this. They can be inexpensive or moderately expensive or very expensive. But the ones that I use, after many years of experience, are significantly expensive. They run around $50 for a box of these. And there are, I believe, 72 in there. Yes, 72 per box. There's an interesting concept in the world of live blood microscopy that is incredibly important that a lot of people don't know about, and it's called artifacts. Now, you hear the word artifact, and you think it's something you find in a tomb somewhere, or at the bottom of the ocean, or in a cave from a previous civilization on the planet. And it can be a spearhead or some pottery or something like that. But an artifact is basically something you don't expect to be there or isn't normally there. And one of the things that I have done is extensive, over 1,000 hours of research on eliminating artifacts. Why do we want to eliminate artifacts? Well, an artifact showing up on the microscope slide on the microscope is something that's not supposed to be there. Let me repeat, it's not supposed to be there. It's not part of the client's blood. Now, it can be a speck of dust. It can be an energetic artifact caused by static electricity or even by magnetic fields, which might be produced by things like light sources and power supplies that are in the vicinity, or a Wi-Fi router that's in the vicinity of the microscope and the sample being examined. One of the things that I have noticed, strangely enough, I was doing live blood analysis for a naturopathic physician friend of mine in Canada, and I would go in one morning a week and he would have 3 or 4 clients booked for their analysis. And every single client that I evaluated had damaged red blood cells. Initially, I thought he just had a lot of very sick clients because that was an indication of radiation damage to the blood. After about 3 weeks of seeing every single client having this finding in the blood, I realized this couldn't just be every single client being ill. So I started to evaluate what was going on in his office. And it turned out there was a cell tower 120 feet from his office. And he was on the 3rd floor of the building. At that time, I had a meter to measure radiofrequency radiation, and the readings in his office were extremely high. And I realized at that point that the damage I was seeing on the microscope slide in the red blood cells had nothing to do with being an artifact as such, other than it was damage that was occurring after the sample went on the actual microscope slide. I was doing live blood analysis at another location at that time, and I did not see the same level of radiation damage in the people at that other location. So I told him that really the only option was for him to get a different office. Unfortunately, he didn't want to do that because he had invested huge amounts of money in renovations and didn't want to waste his money that he had put into that facility, which was a rental, and so consequently he stayed there and kept up with his practice in a rather compromising situation, which was unfortunate, but that's what he did. So I learned a very quick lesson, and I learned that non-ionizing radiation in this sample on the microscope slide was a significant indication they had exposure levels that were way too high. And that's when I started questioning people about their exposure and advising them on how to mitigate that exposure and clean up their electromagnetic environment so that they weren't compromised and that their health would improve. So that's just one example of an artifact. So artifacts can be dust, they can be dirt on the slide. Over the years, I have experimented with probably 50 brands of microscope slides over the years. And ultimately, I've only found one brand that really is perfect. And they are from Germany. And the reason they're perfect is they are absolutely 100% clean, unlike a lot of supposedly clean microscope slides that really aren't, that I have to clean with alcohol before I use if I'm using those. But the Magna brand out of West Germany are absolutely clean and always have been. They are available in many countries. I actually, at this point in time, have some on the way down from Canada because I can't obtain them where I currently live. And I have some on the way because they make life a lot easier when you don't have to clean the slide with alcohol before you use it. So you want to make sure your slides are top quality and are extremely clean, and there are methods to clean them. We teach all of this in the course, by the way. So the microscope slide itself is something that's very, very important. The next component is called the cover slip. And I will explain what a cover slip is. It is a very, very thin piece of glass. I hope we can see it here. If we get it just right with the light reflecting, you can see it. And it is 0.17 of an inch thick. Very, very thin. And it goes on. Once the drop of blood has been put on the microscope slide, we put the cover slip onto the drop of blood, and then the drop of blood spreads on the slide very thinly, we hope. And there are issues with that we teach in the course on how to make sure that that blood sample spreads properly so that we can evaluate each and every individual cell properly. There's another issue that occurs, and this was talked about by my instructor way back in 1995, but never dealt with. Now that is static electricity. Now, most people know or have played with balloons when they were small children. And they've rubbed that balloon on their head and stuck it on the wall. Does anyone remember that? I expect you do, because I think a lot of children have done that and wondered, how does that stick on the wall? And it doesn't stay on the wall because the static electricity initially sticks it on the wall, but after a while the balloon falls to the floor after the static electricity has dissipated. When you clean a microscope slide with special paper that's sterile and you rub that slide regularly, you're going to create the same situation, static electricity. Now, that static electricity will affect the blood cells in various ways when they go on the microscope slide. That's just what happens. So, in order to dissipate that static electricity, what I did was I came up with a special plate. And I'll hold it here, you can see it. It holds the microscope slide and the cover slip. And you'll notice there is a wire coming off of this plate. And that wire has on the end of it a single green plug. And green stands for ground. So what we are doing with this plate is we are grounding the microscope slide and the cover slip and removing any static electricity that has been created by the cleansing of the slide. The removal of that static electricity ensures that we don't have that static electricity altering the structure or function of those cells on the slide, and it will do that significantly. All of what I'm talking about now in regards to artifacts has been thoroughly researched over the years with probably 1,000 hours of research on how not to have artifacts on the sample. And the reason I talk about this in the course is that there are numerous practitioners or instructors in live blood analysis that unfortunately don't know these concepts the way I do and teach that some of these artifacts are actually part of the sample and are indicating a certain disease pattern in the person that donated the blood sample. This, of course, is erroneous, erroneous being a word that means in error, and people are getting false information that unfortunately can lead to challenges with recommendations that they don't need or things that they do need that are not recognized, and that is what we do not want to see in live blood analysis. Bringing credibility back to live blood analysis is one of the goals that I have had for many, many years, because I was taught live blood analysis on a very scientific basis by a PhD in microbiology who worked with 4 other practitioners who were medical or physiology majors with PhDs or medical degrees that developed live blood analysis in the current form that it is taught in my course. And so I want to continue that tradition of science-based live blood analysis and not what I call fantasy or fraud. And there is unfortunately some of that going on in live blood analysis instruction. And it's an unfortunate thing, but in the world of alternative health, there is a lot of that going on, which unfortunately can lead to challenges with the ability of certain health practitioners to give the proper recommendations. So I'm Dr. Ross Andersen. This has been an overview and some information on microscopes and the microscope course that will be occurring early March. And if you are interested in learning more and perhaps becoming a microscopist or simply learning how to use this technology to improve your own life, the links will be in the description, and we hope to see you there. Please know that there is a rather limited enrollment for this program because it is hands-on for the course. I have taught medical doctors, I've taught naturopaths, I've taught lots of other health professionals from various disciplines, and this is an incredibly valuable thing to add to your practice or to simply know to help your family and friends. So hope to see you there. Stay healthy.